all at once. What we are, what we stand for. I didn't feel like us, and I didn't feel a part of you. I didn't feel like I could do that, but I thought about us and what we are, and our code is love and tolerance. And I said, I just got to act that way. And I put my arm around him. There's a loving action. That's good, huh? Stiff as a board. And he drops his head in my shoulder, and I'm like, oh, no. And I don't know what to do. And I think loving action, I'll rub his back. Oh, that's good, that's good. And I run my hand down his back, and he presses his head further into my chest, and his breathing starts to even out. And I'm stroking his back, and I'm thinking about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm thinking about everything you've ever done for me and all the kindness you've shown me. And I can't explain it any simpler than this. It seemed like every time my hand went down his back, just a little bit of the resentment I had towards John went away, and just a little bit of compassion came in. And this went on for about 20 minutes. And when I was done, John was asleep in my arms. And I laid John back on the bed, and I gave him a little kiss on his forehead, and I walked out of the room. And whatever was wrong between John and I before that experience was gone and was never to return again. And I even got that wrong, because I went to my sponsor, and I said, I'm so glad I was able to let John know that he was loved before he died, that he didn't think I had a problem with him. I'm glad I was able to do that. And my sponsor laughed and said, God, Don, you even got this wrong. That wasn't your gift to John. That was John's gift to you. And I didn't realize that the resentment always hurts the offender. It's always the person carrying the resentment. It's like pissing down your leg. You're the only one that can feel it, but everybody else can see it. You know, it just... My wife was a great example of that. John passed away. We continued to build a life for ourselves in Los Angeles, continued to be active in Alcoholics Anonymous. We were up in the Seattle area about 6 years ago at a wedding, minding our own business, and my wife was particularly nasty on the Sunday we were going to fly back to L.A., and I just finally asked her, do I owe you an amends? Is there something I should be doing? Because no offense, you are out of control. You are really pissing me off. And she said, no, it's not that. And she broke into tears and she said, I don't want to live in L.A. I don't want to live in an ugly place where we're afraid to go out at night. And I want to live in some place beautiful. And she was hysterical. And I thought, oh, no, not this, not now. Not when your business is doing so well and my business. And I love my AA and I love my home group. And I talked to my sponsor about it. He goes, well, you got to be willing to do whatever. You're married. You got to be willing to talk about it. And I just waited her out. You know what I mean? I just, she subscribed to the papers up here, was checking out real estate, and she had all this enthusiasm. And she finally just kind of wound down, I thought. And then about 4 years ago, we took a road trip, I thought, to go visit her brother in Oak Harbor, Washington, and to do a little B&B action on the coast. And we end up in Bellingham, and we're just going to check out the real estate market, and it becomes very apparent to me that I'm looking for something maybe when we retire, and she's looking for something like now. And I asked her, I said, are you actually thinking about this like now? And she goes, yeah. I go, well, did we talk about this? She goes, well, yeah. I said, we talked about when we retired. She goes, yeah, but I don't want to wait. I said, this is crazy. This is crazy. Now, what you don't know about me is I'm about as conservative, and I research, and I don't do anything impulsively. And I got to tell you, it's one of those weird times where I just got down on my knees and I prayed with my wife, and I couldn't think of any reason not to do it that wasn't selfish. And I said to myself, and this is it, and this is the truth, I said, well, we can move up to the Pacific Northwest, and if it doesn't work out, it'll be a good story to tell someday. And that's all I could come up with. And it's the most irresponsible thing I've ever done in my sobriety. I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. We actually bought a house with no plan other than love. Other than my wife wanted to live somewhere pretty. She didn't want to live a place where she was scared. She didn't want to live a place where she was afraid for her life when she left the house. She didn't want to live a place where she didn't know when the next thing was going to happen, when the next riot was going to occur. She wanted to live someplace where she saw beauty and where she could feel in touch with the artistic side. She didn't want to wait until she was old to have beauty every day. Isn't that stupid? Freaking silly. And you know, when you say it like that, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? I'm telling you, people thought we lost our freaking mind. They were like, you know, we were lockstep in a very big active home group and very happy. And, you know, but we did it. It's been almost 4 years now. And I got to tell you, once again, I'm wrong. You know, I think I did this for my wife. Aren't I a nice guy? It's pretty spiritual, Don. You know, just jump into the abyss like that for love. Oh, my God, that's like poetry. Yeah, I'm quite a guy. And the truth of the matter is, as good a move as it's been for her, I think it's been better for me. You know, I found a rhythm here that I didn't know my soul yearned for, and I'm very, very happy to be where I'm at. I'm very happy with the AA, and I'm very happy with the people. You know, it's very surprising that, you know, after years of being wrong about things and just by staying in the process, getting to discover that I'm wrong, you know that, and this is absolutely true, when I make mistakes now, I kind of get excited. And I mean that. Like, I don't get freaked out anymore. I used to get so judgmental of myself, and I'm a bad person, and I'm a loser, and why am I so stupid? And remember when I got into sales, you know, and I was a terrible salesman, and I'm reading books on sales, and I'm doing these appointments. I got to go meet with people I've never met before, and they suggest that you make conversation, and I don't know how to make conversation or small talk, and I met this lady, and I'm trying to make – she's pregnant. It's obviously she's pregnant, so at the end of the appointment, I go, how far along are you? And she goes, what? And like any good alcoholic, I've got the shovel, I'm digging, why stop? And I said, well, aren't you pregnant? No, I'm not pregnant. Okay, well, let me keep digging. Would you have a child recently? I'm just keep digging. She says, about 2 years ago. I hand her my business card. I said, thanks, I'll be in touch. And I walk out to my car and I grab the steering wheel and I'm slamming my head on the steering wheel going, stupid, 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 you know. You know, you go through these things in sobriety and you find out you're wrong about stuff, but you take your lumps, you know what I mean? You suit up and you show up and now when I do stupid things and I make mistakes, I go, well, great, you know, I know that something I get to do differently because of the process. You know, when I made mistakes before, I just felt like I was a pawn in some bizarre game, like I had no control of my life. And the thing is, I don't have the control like I run the show, but I know that when I make a mistake, I get to learn about myself. I find that almost everything in my life, the way that I found my wife, the way that I'm in the business I'm in, the fact I live where I live, the fact that I'm 16 years sober, the relationships I've had with the men here in Alcoholics Anonymous, every single one of those things, every direction that I've taken that I didn't agree with, had the principle of I had to be wrong in order to take the direction. I had to be wrong because I disagreed with it. I had to find out. I had to do things I didn't believe in. I didn't believe there was a God. I didn't believe that I could stay sober. I didn't believe that I could go a day without taking a drink. All these things I have to be wrong about. And what we talk about here is just being teachable. I'll tell you, we're going to have a lot of time to talk, so I'm just going to wrap it up now because we're going to be talking about the steps, and you're going to hear a lot about me through that process too, I'm sure. So I want to thank you guys for tonight. We'll call it a night. We'll pick it up tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Don Landis, alcoholic. Yeah. He must have really wanted that T-shirt. It was like last chance, going, gone. How's the, you're going to get home, they're going to ask you, how was the weekend? It was great, I got the T-shirt. Well, what we're going to do, in case you guys don't know, is we're going to go to about 10:15 this morning. Then we're going to break for about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll stop before noon so we can get over and have some lunch. And what we're going to do is an overview on the steps. There's some things I want everyone to be really clear about before I start. I like to think of myself, I'm just a meat and potatoes AA member. I'm a guy that's been able to stay away from a drink one day at a time by working the program. I don't have a lot of influence from outside help, so I'm not going to be really able to educate anybody on anything other than Alcoholics Anonymous and share my experience, strength, and hope with these steps and what I've been taught. You're not probably going to hear anything original here. And I don't have anything original. I'm a product of Alcoholics Anonymous that says the program works, good or bad. I'm an example of that. So we're going to go over this, and I don't know how fast this is going to go. I'm not really too worried about it. I'm just going to go through the steps, and we'll see where we're at the end of this, and then we'll pick it up again tomorrow. A couple of things I want to talk about before I get into the steps, just some things that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and some of my friends and some old timers that I talk to, and I touched on it last night. There's been a lot of talk in Alcoholics Anonymous, really since I got sober over 16 years ago, about AA recovery rates, what they used to be, and how the program's changing. I'm blessed. There's a guy in Bellingham who actually moved up from my old home group. He's got 55 years of sobriety, and I've been friends with him for over 10, 12, 14 years now, and I kind of hang on his shoulder, and I ask him a lot of questions about what AA used to be like and what he has seen. And he's a real kind, he loves AA, loves the program. And he's got pretty good insight on some of this stuff. But one of the things to keep in mind, Alcoholics Anonymous, our birthday, is basically Dr. Bob's first day of recovery. And the first men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the book refers to them as the first 100 men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous that recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. They weren't going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. There were no Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. They were going to Oxford group meetings. And a lot of people in a lot of areas they didn't even have telephones. They were going to about a meeting a week. There was no 90 and 90, nor is 90 and 90 referred to anywhere in our 12 and 12 or our big book. And yet somehow, with all the advantages of modern AA, treatment facilities, more meetings than you can possibly get to that are available to you, more people in the same room that you're attending meetings with that have good knowledge of the steps and how the program works. Somehow we don't have that 90% recovery rate that they talk about in the early literature. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that, and I just want to keep this in mind. I think early in Alcoholics Anonymous, and people have argued, well, the early members, they were low bottom drunks, and that's not true. A lot of them were professionals that came from very affluent backgrounds, and maybe the moment they walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, they were at the bottom of the ladder. But these weren't people that were losers necessarily at the game of life their whole life. These are people that had great success in life at one point. So that doesn't really hold. I mean, maybe it's because oh gosh, we've got drug addicts in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's an argument I hear a lot. And if you really want to educate yourself to that, pick up a collection of the grapevines from 40, 50 years ago, and the same letters were in there 40, 50 years ago. People concerned about people coming to Alcoholics Anonymous that had problems other than their alcoholism. So that's always been around. But I think what it is the environment for recovery that was available to the suffering alcoholic then as opposed to now. And the environment there is you were lucky if you could get to a meeting a week. And the program was you sat down with another member of Alcoholics Anonymous in the form of a sponsor who was a little bit further down the road with you, and you immediately started doing step work. Immediately. And in the very beginning, you didn't even really join in with the group and become a member until you'd taken the first 3 steps. And you were writing your inventory immediately. The outstanding example of that is, the story with Dr. Bob, who the last day he drank was the first day he did his amends, his first day of sobriety. And so the idea that something's happened in Alcoholics Anonymous over the years that somehow we have this attitude like, whoa, Nellie, let's slow down. We don't need to rush into this thing. Let's wait till we sober up a little bit. Let's wait till we have a better understanding of ourselves. And then we'll get into these steps, because you don't want to do that. You're not a fully formed person yet. You really need to discover your insights. My God, set some boundaries for yourself, kid. And then we'll get into that stuff and what they did to you. And I want you to, and I mean this absolutely. My first week in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been trying to catch that week ever since, in terms of my desperation and willingness. Now, I got to tell you, it was the lowest point of my life, but in terms of what pure teachability is and pure open-mindedness is, I didn't have a good attitude, but I was open-minded, and I was teachable. I knew one thing: I couldn't make a false move. I didn't have the luxury of arguing with anything that was coming at me. I might have intellectually tried to swat it away, but I wasn't saying anything, and I was showing up. because I was really afraid that I wasn't going to be able to even make it through a night without drinking. And the second night I felt the same way. I was probably in Alcoholics Anonymous, to be honest with you, a couple of years before what I call I exhaled, where I stopped holding my breath, where I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, where I actually thought, you know what, I think I can stay sober one day at a time if I continue to do these things. But I didn't feel that way for probably my first couple of years. You know, I still was waking up in the morning and saying, God, I can't believe I'm still sober. You know, I'd wake up and go, am I sober? Did I do anything? And I'd run back through my mind like, no, I haven't drank, I haven't done, okay, I'm good. And I'd get up. And that kind of fear, you know, will keep you sober for a while, but not for the long haul. So as we go through these steps, I think it's important that we, or for me, when I work the steps with anybody that I'm sponsoring or doing anything like this, is to try to stay in touch with the purity of it and try to remember how it was designed. And Alcoholics Anonymous is for alcoholics. I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? You know, but that's what we do here. This isn't if you came here to mend a relationship, you're probably in the wrong place. If you came here to figure out how to get your business up off the ground, you're probably in the wrong place. Now, all these things can occur in Alcoholics Anonymous through living by the principles, but ultimately, Alcoholics Anonymous is about freedom from drinking. It's freedom from having to drink to stay on the planet and tear everybody's life down around you and your own. And that's what the steps produce. What we're trying to do with the steps is produce a psychic change. You know, and spiritual experience in the back of the book, the best line that describes that is it says that we're going to experience a profound alteration in our reaction to life. Which means life's not going to change, we're going to change. Our reaction to it's going to change. That the problem isn't them, it's us. That the problem resides within us. Later in the literature, it'll tell us that the problem resides mainly in our mind. That creates quite a dilemma for us, doesn't it? Because we've got to use our minds to work the program. So what we try to do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we try to find a guide in the form of a sponsor who's going to take us through this process. So we're going to basically use our minds as little as possible as we go through the steps. And we're going to try to really have somebody intervene on our behalf and trust their perception of what our perception is as we go through this process. Because the one thing I do know is this will never fix this. You can't take a broken tool and fix a broken tool with it. It just doesn't work. And if the problem remains mainly in my mind, I have to respect that. And I have to be wary of that. I mentioned the Oxford group and the high recovery rates would eventually destroy the Oxford groups. It's the same thing that took out the Washingtonians. You know, they got a little too big for their britches, started spreading themselves thin, started getting involved in things other than alcoholism. And one of the things that's protected our society is obviously the traditions. And we have learned from our history. There have been movements in history that have had great success in combating alcoholism. And all of them died drunk, with the exception of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's mainly because we're not concerned with anything outside of ourselves. I think our preamble is perfect that we read at meetings. I think that's wonderful. And we really do not have opinions on outside issues. And I love the old timers that when you know, with no fault of your own, bring that stuff into AA, they'll talk to you about that and say, we don't talk about that here. You can talk about it in the parking lot, but you're not talking about it in the meeting. You're not going to bring politics into our meeting. You're not going to bring your money-making schemes into our meeting. Here we talk about alcoholism. And I really appreciate the old timers that, you know, hold our feet to the fire. And it's funny because you think, well, what does that have to do with staying sober? But if you become, and I suggest if you're not, that you become familiar with our history, and not just our history, but the history of the Oxford group and the history of the Washingtonians. Because sometimes we don't understand how wildly successful these groups were. And how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of members in the Washingtonians' case, sober alcoholics they had within their fold. And how they all died drunk. In very short order, they were torn apart by infighting because they didn't stay with their primary purpose. The Oxford groups had 6 steps, which are going to sound very familiar. Their 6 steps were 1, complete deflation, which later became our step 1. 2, dependence and guidance from a higher power, which later became steps 2, 3, 6, 7, and 11. 3, a moral inventory, which later became steps 4 and 10. 4, confession, which later became step 5. Their fifth step was restitution, which later became our steps 8 and 9. 6, continue to work with other alcoholics, which later became our step 12. When Bill Wilson sat down and he was kicking around the idea of writing his own steps, he only came up with 6 of them and expanded those to 12 for various reasons. But the first one was admitted hopeless. 2, got honest with self. 3, got honest with other. 4, made amends. 5, help others without demand. 6, pray to God as you understand him. And that was the original idea that Bill had for the steps, and we're going to talk about the steps as they exist today. And step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I'm going to talk about the principle associated with the step as I was taught it. The principle associated with step 1 is honesty. Until an alcoholic can become honest with himself, there's no hope for recovery. Unless he can, without any justification or rationalization, appeasement to others, as the book says, to admit to his innermost self that he's an alcoholic, there's no chance for recovery. And that's the honesty referred to in the principle at work in the first step. It's surrender is an essential ingredient in the first step. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I had a great drunk-a-log, Oh, I drank more than anybody else, and I drank when I didn't want to drink, and just all the tough guy stuff, and unmanageability. Well, come on, I haven't had a valid driver's license in 10 years, and I'm 80 grand in debt to the IRS, and nobody on the planet wants to talk to me, and I've lost every good job I've ever had. I've taken every opportunity in life, and I've just thrown it out the window, so I don't really have any problem with the manageability, so let's move on to step 2, and my sponsor said, no, we're going to slow down a little bit. There's a couple of things you're going to need to understand before we can move past step 1. The first thing you're going to need to understand, Don, is, that's great that you say you're an alcoholic, but that's not the kind of admission that we're looking for here. You can raise your hand in a meeting till the cows come home and say you're an alcoholic, and you can tell everybody on the wet end of a bar that you're an alcoholic. We don't really care about that. We want to make sure that you've admitted to your innermost self, and there's some things you're going to need to understand before you're sure that's occurred. First of all, you're going to need to know the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. You're going to need to find out what's wrong with you. Now, Dr. Silkworth, was a great friend of the program and wrote the doctor's opinion. Now, Dr. Silkworth had been working in the field of alcoholism every day with alcoholics for 9 years when he had met Bill, and he had figured out from just observation that there was definitely a physical aspect to this thing, and which he called the allergy, which was very interesting to Bill. In fact, in the book, Bill writes, it explains a lot of things that we couldn't explain ourselves. It seems to make sense. But what Bill discovered that Silkworth didn't discover was the absolute necessity for an alcoholic to work with another alcoholic. And so what we end up with these people working together is the threefold disease. We get the mental, the spiritual, and the physical side of the disease. And the big differential between this is all drinkers have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart in a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment which we are entirely familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. Now, that was Silkworth's take on it. Now, abstinence would be a wonderful answer if there was only a physical aspect to alcoholism. Now, and that was my mistake when I was out there for 6 years on my own, trying to quit drinking on my own. I thought self-knowledge was the answer. I thought that the fact that I understood what happened to me when I drank, and I understood the trouble that it caused in my life, would enable me not to have to drink anymore. I just knew that would be just stupid, wouldn't it? After all the trouble I get into. I would sit in jail for a couple of days in the Van Nuys jail and think about my life, take my inventory, if you will. And I would come up like, I shouldn't drink. And I'd make a commitment to myself that I wasn't going to drink anymore. And they'd let me out, and I would walk across the street from the Van Nuys jail to the liquor store and buy a six-pack every time. Because I wasn't going to drink anymore, but I had to go sit down and think things through, and I might as well have a couple of beers when I do that, because beer's not really drinking. Silkworth described the mental obsession as this: men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks they see others taking with impunity. After they are succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over and over. Unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. Self-knowledge will avail us nothing. Big Book tells us for the real alcoholic, he will absolutely be unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. I almost died out there personally because that didn't make any sense to me. I'm a macho tough guy, and when macho tough guys find out they have a problem with something, you don't ask for help, you just knock it off. And I tried for 6 years to knock it off, and I couldn't. And I didn't understand what was going on with me. And the line I love the most in here, drinks they see others taking with impunity. I don't know what pisses you off when you're trying to quit drinking without Alcoholics Anonymous, but what pisses me off is them. The ones that are your buddies, and they're going, man, I am so glad you quit drinking. You really had a problem. You know, you're going to have a problem when I punch you right in the back of that beer mug. Just makes me crazy. I think that I'm upset with them, and what I'm upset with is I can't drink anymore. I've lost my best friend. The thing that tears my life apart, that causes me untold heartache and damages the people around me, has somehow become the most precious thing in the world to me once I stop doing it. My alcoholic life seems the only normal life. It makes perfect sense to me. So my sponsor now has me understand the differential between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic, which is when a non-alcoholic drinks, he may be a heavy drinker. He might like to tie one on once in a while. He might like to drink a bunch of booze when he's watching the football game. He may like to go out and make some whoopee on New Year's Eve. He may love 4 or 5 glasses of scotch on just the right afternoon, but he can take it or leave it. He doesn't develop the phenomenon of craving. The difference with that is when I put alcohol in my system of any type, it doesn't matter what my plan was. It doesn't matter if I had the 2-beer, 2-shot rule. I get off work, I'm going to go to the bar, I'm going to have 2 beers, 2 shots, and I'm going to go home. It's a good plan. The minute I take the first beer into my system, the game's over. I don't know if I'm going home. I may, but I may not. I've lost the power of choice where that's concerned, and I needed to understand what the difference was. Now, the other thing is being spiritually blocked off, and the book refers to this as self-centered fear. And it seems to be an attribute of the alcoholic. And you need to understand that this self-centered fear, which blocks us off from God, that allows us to keep drinking, is something that can continue into sobriety. A lot of the conditions that we're going to discuss this morning and tomorrow, one of the things to keep in mind as you listen to them, if we are talking about a condition that from the book describes the alcoholic in his cups, or the alcoholic that's still drinking, and you're sober for some time in Alcoholics Anonymous, and you identify with that condition, you may, I'm not saying you are, but you may be suffering to a degree from untreated alcoholism. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to die drunk, but it means that you should take note of that if when we're talking about conditions that apply to people that are drinking, if you're still experiencing those feelings, you may want to look at that, because a lot of us come into Alcoholics Anonymous and we get the first part of the problem taken care of, which is what Silkworth talked about, abstinence. The only thing the medical community has to suggest is abstinence. Well, for God's sakes, just don't drink. Just don't drink. And you may be just not drinking in AA. And this brings me back to early Alcoholics Anonymous and what Alcoholics Anonymous is like today. You can build yourself a juggernaut of a program of distraction rather than a program of action in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have picnics, we have retreats, we have barbecues, we have sober softball, we have sober bowling, we have sober dating, we have sober dances, we have 90 and 90. You can go to meetings morning, noon, and in the evening. You can go to 3 meetings a day. You can stay so busy in Alcoholics Anonymous that you won't have time to work the steps. You will build a new foundation and you'll leave out the most important tool. Now, anyone that goes to meetings on a regular basis knows people that do this, knows people that don't work the steps, that aren't in the process. And what we're going to try to rediscover here today, if we don't know this already, is these are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. This is the program. Now, going to meetings is essential. I go to a lot of meetings every week. I like going to meetings. In modern AA, that's where they hide the newcomers. That's a good place to go find someone to work with. When we get into the 12-step later on, I'll talk a little bit more about what 12-step work is like today as opposed to what it was before. But I just want you to keep in mind, opposed to one of the good things and one of the bad things. Modern AA, it's so easy for us to get together. It's so easy for us to have that fellowship. It's so easy for us to find that help. But sometimes I think the steps have taken a back seat to other things. I have heard over and over and over again stories of men that have come to me and said, I'm 4 months sober and my sponsor won't let me work the steps. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He wants me to get 6 months before I start with the steps. Now, this isn't isolated. I've had these experiences over and over again, and I don't know why that is, because like I say, from my own experience, I was perfect to start working the steps immediately because I was open-minded. My ego was on the floor. I didn't have a chance to have anything positive happen in my life that maybe I could take credit for. I could start from that point of failure and destruction and start building a new life with God, and I was in perfect open-mindedness to the concepts that we're going to discuss. I put a little list together for you which deals with the unmanageability that's referred to in the first step. Because in the first step, the way it's written, we have 2 separate thoughts there. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, dash, which means end of first thought, beginning of second thought, and our lives had become unmanageable. And I've heard a lot of debate about that. Well, if it's had become unmanageable, maybe there was a time in my life was manageable. I don't know where you stand on that. I really don't care. For me, it was unimportant. Tomato. I was dying, so it was unmanageable when I got here. Maybe I was hitting it out of the park in the 5th grade. I don't know. That wasn't going on. I have a list of 15 things I'm going to read. All of these are taken from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. 1, I am restless, irritable, and discontented. 2, I'm having trouble in personal relations. 3, I can't control my emotional nature. 4, I'm a prey to misery and depression. 5, I can't make a living. 6, I have a feeling of uselessness. 7, I am full of fear. 8, I am unhappy. 9, I can't really seem to help other people. 10, I am like the actor trying to run the whole show. I arrange the scenery and the players because I know what's best. 11, I'm driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. So I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate. 12, I'm an extreme example of self-well-run riot, though I usually don't think so. 13, I lead a double life by presenting a stage character so I can enjoy a certain reputation. 14, I'm like a tornado roaring my way through the lives of others. Hearts are broken. Sweet relationships are dead. 15, my selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept my home in turmoil. Now, these are examples of unmanageability from the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I don't know about you, but as I put this list together and was thinking about it and pulling things out of the book, those things hit a little too close to home in certain instances of my current sobriety. And I thought to myself, If that's happening in my current sobriety, I need to look at that. And that's why I thank you guys for the opportunity to do this, because you guys have made me start working all the steps over again on a personal level that I got to tell you I wasn't planning on doing, which is, you know. And the wonderful thing about this is, that's why when you sponsor, you know, when you work with guys and you're talking about the book and you're talking about the program and that stuff comes out of your mouth and you go, well, that wasn't of me. You know, God must have flown in the room. That must be what happens when two alcoholics talk, because I'm not smart enough to say what I just said. And then you say goodnight and he goes away and you go, you know, it's pretty good. I should probably try that. You know, well, let's see if it kills him first. 51 pages in the big book are dedicated to step one. 51 pages. The reason that is they really want us to understand the trouble that we're in. If we don't understand the trouble we're in, if we don't understand that we have something that wants nothing less than to kill us, we probably won't follow through with the kind of enthusiasm and strength and fervor that the rest of the steps are going to require. When my sponsor gave me all the information he thought I needed about the first step, and then he said, I want you to read everything I've given you, and I want you to be ready to teach me the first step. That was the way he took you through the steps. You had to be able to teach him the first step, to show him that you had an understanding of it. He said, we're going to get together in a couple of days. I want you to do that. So I decided at that point, because even early in sobriety, my ego had made quite a comeback, that I was going to wow my sponsor and give him the greatest dissertation any newcomer had ever given a sponsor on the first step. And I put it all together, and I sat him down at the coffee bar, and I let him have it, both barrels. I got to tell you, I don't know about him, but when I was done, I was almost crying. It was beautiful. And I was moved beyond belief. And he said, once again, he said no 3 times. No, no, no. And I said, what? And he asked me again if I had admitted in my innermost self if I was an alcoholic. And I said, I think so. And he goes, I'm not hearing it. We're going to find out. And he gave me an exercise to do. He said to go home, and he said, I don't want you to have any, he goes, go home to that room you're mooching off of your sister. That's what he said. And no TV, no radio, and I want you to sit in the dark on the end of your bed, and I want you to repeat one thought in your head over and over again, and only that thought. Do that for about 15 minutes, and then call me. He said, the thought is, I'm an alcoholic. It sounded ridiculous, but, you know, I'll make the old boy happy, and I sat down on the end of the bed, and no TV, no radio, sitting in the dark, and I thought, I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic? And it was very funny. As I said it, it changed. And what he knew and I didn't know, but I found out as I went through the process, so I started thinking what that meant to me. And I had enough information from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I attended enough meetings and heard enough men share openly and honestly about where they had been and how they had felt, that I had identified. I experienced the supreme gift of identification that occurs between alcoholics here. And I got it. I saw the futility of my life and the fatality of my disease. And it scared me. I became very scared because I got how much trouble I was in. And I called my sponsor up and I said to him, I'm in a lot of trouble. And he said, good, now you've got the first step. And he wanted me to understand, after all that work, all that intellectual ping pong, what that did is created an opening in me where I could really understand the trouble I was in. You see, because I'm a guy that will get stuck on the unmanageability of my life. It's easy for me to do when the heat's on and I got warrants for my arrest and I'm hopelessly in debt and these things are going on. I mean, I just can't. You have to point out to me that I'm physically dying from the disease of alcoholism. You need to point that out to me because I'm more concerned about my cash flow. That's just the way I am. And what's funny about the unmanageability is if you ask me if my life is manageable, my first reaction will be thinking about my bank account. And thinking about where I am in the busyness of life, in the structure of life. And I would think, well, I'm doing pretty good. But the truth is that list I put together, you'll notice it only has one reference to financial, and it talks about we can't make a living. But the rest of it is really emotional in nature. It's really about how we feel. Because how you feel determines how you're going to enjoy your life. And we all know people that seemingly have more than we could ever have, and we think, if I had what that guy had, I'd never have a bad day. Yet here I am at 16 years sober, and I will tell you the absolute truth. If the newcomer version of myself was here right now, he would kick my ass. Because he might overhear me at some point in the next week or so complaining about something or someone. And he'd have to kick my ass and ask me those questions. Like, don't you remember where you came from? Don't you remember what it was like? Are you kidding me? And God forbid I ever complained about my wife in front of him. He'd say, you couldn't even get a woman to stand on the same side of the street with you of that quality, let alone marry you. What, did you drug her? You know. So in my own case, I understand that it's very possible in sobriety as we go along not to have these blessings, but to be able to enjoy them. What's the point of being blessed and having this wonderful sober life? Like my buddy Brian says, yeah, I've got a great life, but I've got to live it. That's the trick. My disease resides mainly in my mind, and I have to figure out a way. And I'm not a guy that's going to be able to have an attitude of gratitude. I'm not going to go home and make my gratitude list and then everything's going to be okay. It has to be bigger than that. It has to be bigger than me and my intellect and my emotions. And we're going to start getting into that when we get into the second step, which is our first introduction to the solution. Step one, we really get in touch with the problem. Now we're going to start getting into the solution. And really, steps 1, 2, and 3 tell us what the problem is, start introducing us to the answer. And steps 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is how we get the answer, how we do that. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Principle in play here is belief. Okay. From the big book, page 44, this is from We Agnostics. It says, in the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. Let me repeat that again. You may be suffering from a condition that only a spiritual experience will conquer. So now we know what we have to recover. Okay? We have the answer. We need to have a spiritual experience. Now, later on 44, page 44, it says, to one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. And only in Alcoholics Anonymous can you have the alcoholic doing this. And we do that. Like, hey, I don't want to die and have this pitiful life anymore, but God, really? And I have to serve God? Come on. How bad would it be, Okay. The warnings follow on the bottom of 44 and the beginning of 45. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how hard we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could wish these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as directed by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So what I bring to the game isn't going to work. I may want it to work. I may intellectually have some wonderful ideas. I do not have the power to overcome drinking on my own. And now we're going to get into the big declaration that everybody's familiar with. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this big book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. Now, notice that you're not going to find a power greater than yourself that's going to enable you to solve your problem. It's saying that we're going to find a power greater than ourselves that will solve our problem. And the distinction there is it takes my ego out of it. I don't have to help God as if he needed the help. But I have to understand that what I'm trying to do is access this power, which I've described in the back of the book in Spiritual Experience, the unsuspected inner resource, and God is going to take care of my problem. I'm not going to do it, but I have to access this power. There's a promise contained in Spiritual Experience and a warning, all in one little paragraph. Most emphatically, we wish to say that any alcoholic capable of honestly facing his problems in the light of our experience can recover. That's the promise. The warning is, provided he does not close his mind to all spiritual concepts, he can only be defeated by an attitude of intolerance or belligerent denial. When I worked this step with my sponsor, the first thing that he had me read is actually on page 98 in the big book. And it's kind of a funny story. He gave me the assignment, and he said, I want you to memorize this. And I did. I did that night. And I was kind of burned out at the time. I was early in sobriety. My memory hadn't really come back yet, so I was having a lot of trouble memorizing anything. So it took me hours to memorize, and it's burned the idea into the consciousness of every man that he can get well regardless of anyone. The only condition is he clean house and trust God, or trust God and clean house. So the next day I'm at the clubhouse. I'm waiting for my sponsor to come and ask me for the assignment so I can give it to him. So I'm saying it over and over in my mind as I'm, shadowing my sponsor around, and the whole night goes by and he never asked me. Kind of pissed me off. But that's okay. He's a busy guy. Probably had something else in his mind. He'll probably ask me the next night. And the next night he doesn't ask me again. And I made it to the third night. By now, I just got a full-fledged resentment that he's wasting my time with these silly assignments that he's not following up on. And I said to him, are you ever going to ask me for what it says on page 98 to see if I learned it? And he goes, why would I do that? I know what it says. He says, you need to know what it says. And he goes, okay, tell me what it says. So I tell him what it said. And he goes, tell me what it means. Oh, he didn't say that was part of the assignment. So I had all this stuff going on in my life. I had all these resentments I hadn't dealt with yesterday. So I really liked the part about I can get well regardless to anyone. So when I talked about it, I talked about trusting God and cleaning house and how I was able to, I'm going to be able to do this with God's help, even though, and I gave him the list of all the people that had done me wrong and all the trouble I was having. And he told me I was wrong again. And he said, no, Don, when they say you can get well regardless of anyone, in your case, you're the anyone. And it's something to keep in mind here, that that's one of the beautiful things about Alcoholics Anonymous. Never forget this. You never have to be too big, too strong, too fast to get well here. It isn't about what we're bringing. We're not going to supply the power. So it doesn't matter if you're powerless. It's helpful if you're powerless. It's helpful that if you understand what the book's trying to tell us. Lack of power is our dilemma. I had to find a power greater than ourselves by which we could live. That's what we need to understand in this step. Now we have to start to believe this. And the thing is, I thought that I had to be Gandhi. I thought I had to believe like my sponsor believed. And in Bill's story, the best description of how the second step really happens is Bill, when he was 12-step by Ebby, and Ebby let him know he didn't have to believe like Ebby believed, that he could pick his own conception of God. Bill said it was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon the foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. So the idea is that I don't have to believe like you believe or like you believe or like anybody else believes, but I've got to believe something. And I've got to be willing to believe that this could happen for me. It's the first entrance into the spiritual realm. It's very hard to walk and build a relationship with your higher power if you're absolutely convinced he doesn't exist. Now you can be skeptical, and you can have a lot of religious baggage, or some of the things I've seen men come in here with, things they've had to overcome through a lot of work, but you got to be willing to believe in something. You got to be willing to believe that there's something that runs this deal that maybe could be interested enough in you and love you enough to save you. Wouldn't that be nice? And that's what my sponsor said to me. Wouldn't that be nice, Don? Yeah, that'd be terrific. Don't believe it, hope it's true. And from that small amount of willingness, I was able to start building a new life. On page 47, in We Agnostics, Alcoholics Anonymous wants to make this very clear to us. When we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms or prevent you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we used our own conception, however limited it was. The truth of the matter is that 16 years sober, my God is what you could call him the goulash God, because he's made up of a lot of things I've heard, a lot of things I've read, and a lot of things I've experienced, both personally and through sharing with other men. One of the blessings we get by coming together with other men in Alcoholics Anonymous is we get to talk about our own conception of God, and we get to talk about what God's done for us. I got to do a little bit of that last night, just talking about other men's spiritual awakening and spiritual experiences that they had. And some I identify with, and some I don't necessarily identify with because they haven't happened to me, but I'm moved by them. And maybe I'm moved by them in a direction I need to be moved by, because I don't know why things happen the way they happen here. But I know that one man sharing with another man openly and honestly about God and their experience with it is something that we move other men in directions with that. We help men become open-minded. We help them open their minds to the possibilities. When we say things to people like the book says to us, we felt the same way you felt. We understand. We don't feel that way anymore, and let me talk to you about what transpired to get me from point A to point B to point C. I came from a place where I hoped this was true. I hoped the God thing was true. And now I know it's true, but it's not like I woke up one day and had that belief. Several things had to occur. In We Agnostics, there's a question. It's the second step question. It says we need to ask ourselves one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? And that's when you can answer that question, which is the answer is yes, in case you're not sure. Help you cheat on that one. Only if you want to go to step 3, If you can answer that question. And then when you're new, the answer may sound like, sure, why not? You can move forward. But think about it before you answer it, because it's not asking a lot. Are you now, or are you in the future? Are you willing to believe that maybe there's something that loves you? Maybe. Maybe this could work out for you. And if you can answer yes, then we can start moving forward. Okay. Moving on to step 3, which is one of my favorite steps. Don't you love that when you hear it means, I just love this step. I love all the steps. I always laugh about step 3 because I spend so much time on it, which isn't unusual in Alcoholics Anonymous. When you get stuck between the 3rd step and your 4th step, they call that the 3-step AA tango, where you go 1, 2, 3. And you see the fourth step, you go, nope, 1, 2, 3. See the fourth step, nope, 1, 2, 3. See the fourth step, nope. Nah, we're not doing that yet. Okay. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Principle is surrender. I'll give you the basics that I was taught. I'm going to turn my will and my life. My will is my thinking. My life is my actions. And, I need to understand that. My sponsor also suggested that I turn one more thing over to God. He says, turn your motives over. And I said, well, the book doesn't say that. He goes, well, it does. And he showed me how the book kind of breaks that down. He talked about how motives and thinking are really the same thing. That I've got to be very careful about how I approach my thinking and how I approach my will, because one of the things that will influence it is my motives. And my motives are influenced by 1,000 things, but the biggest one being fear, self-centered fear. Fear of not getting what I want, fear of losing something I have, fear of losing control. And this step is all about surrender. It's all about letting go of control. That's really tough. That's jumping off into the abyss. That's like, well, wait a minute. I don't mind not dying from the seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, and I don't mind hanging out with these chowderheads and going to some meetings. That's great. But you're going to tell me I'm going to give it away. I'm going to give my life away. Well, who's going to take care of me? Well, the master of the universe, the one that created the heavens and the earth, the God. Got anybody else? Because I'm fairly important. Now, I understand that God can make a butterfly, but can he really handle my stuff? Because I'm pretty complicated. And we joke about this, but isn't that the way it is? I mean, I think it's a great idea that you turn your will and life over to the care of God as you understand him. I think it's just terrific, and you're going to be happy, and God's not going to let you down. Me? I don't know. I went to my sponsor once, and I said, why does God hate me? He said, oh, kid, God doesn't hate you. He's just like the rest of us. There's just something about you that pisses him off. We're going to make a decision. There's a lot of cute stuff that in AA about decision. All you need to know about a decision is this. Any decision in anything that you do in the world is always followed by action. In business, in love, socially. It's always followed by action. So keep that in mind. People get hung up on that, like, well, I'm making a decision, but it just isn't enough. And of course it's not. That's why we have the rest of the steps. But in itself, what we're trying to do in the third step is I have to get ready to do some things. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are coming. And I can't do this alone. I don't have the power to stay away from a drink on a daily basis. And I'm doing the inventory process not to be free. I did the inventory and I felt free. I'm doing the inventory to find out how screwed up I am and what I did wrong so I can make it right, so I can get the things that are between me and God out of the way. I don't have the power to do that. I'm not going to do that. Did you hear my story last night? I'm not that moral. I'm certainly don't have that kind of work ethic. I don't really care that much. It's got to be bigger than me. And the wonderful thing is the lash of alcoholism and the fear of dying from a horrible alcoholic death will hopefully give me enough of a push to look at some of these things open-mindedly. Which is why when we get guys that are new in the program and as their sponsors, we need to get them through these things as quickly as possible, not so they can feel bad about themselves even more when they feel bad, but because we need to get them hooked up with a God of their own understanding, which is the only thing that's going to produce a psychic change, which is the only thing that's going to produce a spiritual awakening, which is the only thing that's going to allow them not to die from alcoholism. The problem is the longer we're here, some remarkable things happen when we put down the drink. And I talked about them last night. The outside stuff starts looking better. We start going to work 5 days a week. We start not spending all our money on booze. We start doing a lot of the stuff on the society stuff. Our ego that is laid out flat on the floor stands up like a vampire in an old movie, looks at this good stuff going on in our life and says, look what we did. And we want to believe that. The longer you let a new guy just go to meetings, just don't drink no matter what, Billy, okay. As long as you let him do that and not get into the steps and experience the spiritual awakening, you could be aiding in his destruction rather than helping him. If we think we know anything other than to push people into the program of recovery and have them take the steps as quickly as possible, we could be killing people. Because the greatest asset we have as alcoholics when we work the steps for the first time is desperation. But it goes away. Fear. But it goes away. When you've just left the battlefield and the gunpowder, the smell of the smoke is still in your nostrils, and the horror is fresh in your memory, you're open-minded about what you have to do not to go back there. Pain has no memory. It fades. And I've seen it happen with men that have horrendous bottoms that come into Alcoholics Anonymous, from correctional institutions, from horrible drug addiction and alcoholism, and are so willing in Alcoholics Anonymous, but don't get into the process of recovery so they don't have the psychic change that their old self shows up in recovery. And we all know it. A guy where the first 3 or 4 months he was just a sweet kid. He was really making a beginning in Alcoholics Anonymous, really trying. And you liked him because he liked talking to you. He wanted to know what you had to say about stuff. He respected the fact you'd been here a while. And one day it's a different guy. One day he's hip, slick, and cool. One day you're saying, hey, are you staying for the business meeting after the meeting? He goes, yeah, we'll let you chowderheads take care of that. We'll let you control freaks do that. I'm out of here. And you're like, uh-oh. And you start waving goodbye because you know what just happened. And if we don't get people into the process of recovery where they can start to change and get down to their inner self, find out what's wrong with them and start to work on this stuff, which produces a psychic change, we may drive them right out of the rooms because they've never experienced Alcoholics Anonymous. And they'll go out there and die thinking they did AA. God, I went to a meeting every day. I had a sponsor. I called other men in the program. I went to retreats. And I got drunk again. AA doesn't work. You know. The steps are our program of recovery. So we're going to make this decision. It's always going to be followed by action. Okay. Fun little trivia game. I don't know if most of the meetings you go to, you probably read that portion of chapter 5. It's always fun to ask people in the book, what's the first line after that you read at every meeting? It's being convinced we're at step 3. And they're going to give us the requirement for step 3. And please keep in mind this is a requirement, not a suggestion, that this is a requirement. The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion, and of course that's not just alcoholics, that's most people. Each person is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may be sometimes quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest, but as with most humans, he is most likely to have varied traits. And then it tells us what happens when we live like that. What usually happens, the show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still the play does not suit him. Admitting he be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is his basic trouble? Is he not a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to the rest of the players that these are the things he wants? And do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can out of the show? Is he not, even in his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Does anybody relate to that? Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. We step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us, seemingly without provocation. But invariably we find that at some time in the past we made decisions based on self, which later placed us in the position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible, and there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us have had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we cannot live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. So in the third step, we're going to clearly state the spiritual problem, which is selfishness and self-centeredness. Now that's the root of our problem. So if you think of a plant and you think of a root, there can be a lot going on from the roots up. So you have a choice in your recovery. You can deal with the root of your problem, and automatically, if you deal with the root, you will deal with everything that is above the ground. If you do not deal with the root, you may become a master gardener. You may spend your entire sobriety pruning all the different branches that spring out from your selfishness and your self-centeredness. I am lazy. I would rather work with the root and get everything in one shot. It's easier for most alcoholics I've worked with, rather than have a 72-item character defect list, to have one with one character defect, selfish and self-centered. And it's an interesting thing. Anytime you can think of a character defect, I don't care what it is, try this later. See if you can trace it back to selfishness and self-centeredness. I guarantee you can. Every one. They all go back to there. That's where they go. Everyone comes from that. The spiritual dilemma involved in that is now we have self-knowledge. Okay? We know what our problem is, but we don't have the power to do anything about it. We understand that we don't have the power to stay away from a drink a day at a time, but not only that, we don't have the power to get rid of self entirely without God's help. In fact, it tells us we don't even have the power to reduce it. Because I'm willing to just go settle for progress, aren't you? Like, I'm not looking to be selfless. How about less selfish? Doesn't that sound good? How about if I just reduce it? You know, I know there's times my wife would say, that'd be great. It'd be terrific. I'll settle for a little less selfish. That'd be a good place to start for you. But now it's telling me that I can't even reduce it without God's help. So, being a good alcoholic, I don't know about you, I put it to the acid test. I don't know if anybody identifies with this. I didn't make a declaration of my sponsor, but I live my life with and without God in sobriety. Not necessarily meaning to, but one of the gifts of being sober is we're conscious. We may not have a conscious contact with God at all times, so we're conscious. So what? We get to do what we do and get what we get. And we get to remember it. And you get to experience what happens when we live our life a certain way with God and when we live our life the same way without God. And we notice there's a difference. There's something that happens when we live our life with God that doesn't happen. And it isn't necessarily the results. Because I can live my life on self-will and get seemingly good societal results. Do well in business, do well financially, get my ducks in a row. But there's an uneasiness about that. There's an arrogance about that. There's an exhaustion about that I don't seem to experience when I'm living in the third step. The third step in its purest form, unfortunately, which is how I know I don't live in the third step most of the time in its purest form, is this. If I'm really living in the third step, I'm fine all the time. Nothing ever bothers me. Because I've turned my will and life over to the care of God as I understand Him. I've turned my thinking and my actions over, so it's none of my business anymore. I don't run the show. So whatever happens, I guess that's what's supposed to happen. I'm just trying to figure out what He wants me to do and serve His kids. Thank you very much. I'm in a great mood all the time. That's not real, is it? That's not really how it goes. And it's a great indication that there's always room here. Now, the good news about Alcoholics Anonymous is I can be open and disclosing about how bad I do this stuff in reality in terms of the perfect idea, yet I'm able to stay sober and have a pretty good life. And I don't really want to, if you want to know what kind of guy I am, talk to my neighbors. Talk to my employer, talk to my wife, talk to my friends. That's how you're really going to find out what kind of guy I am. I mean, I could come up here, who am I? My value is always going to be measured by my worth to other people, not to myself. We already know what my value is to myself. I'm incredibly valuable. So, as we all are to ourselves. Now we're going to get into the solution, third step solution. This is the how and why of it. First of all, dummy, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that in this hereafter, in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are His agents. He is the Father. We are His children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Okay, so we're going to be all spiritual. We're going to throw on some robes, light some incense. We're going to take the third step prayer, and we're going to stop playing God because it didn't work. And we're going to make this declaration that from here on out, God is management and we are labor. And we're going to do that. If you are a self-centered alcoholic like me, you will think this question if you don't ask it of someone, which is, what's in it for me? Besides not dying from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Because that's not enough for us. It's just not. Okay, third step promise is on page 63. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things followed. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed, if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. So what are we going to get out of this? We're going to face life successfully. We're going to feel new power flow in. We're going to enjoy peace of mind. We're not going to be afraid of yesterday, today, or tomorrow. We're going to have a new life. We're going to be reborn. I said to my sponsor, I go, reborn sounds a little evangelical, don't you think? And he said, well, I kind of like it. He goes, Don, what would you have to do before you're reborn? I said, I don't know. What? He goes, you'd have to die. And what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we don't die a physical death, but we kind of kill off our old selves in order for the new self. And that's what these steps are going to do. He goes, that son of a bitch that's been running your life, I'd kill that SOB if I were you. Because he's trying to kill you. And I'll tell you, I've spent a lot of time since that conversation with my sponsor trying to kill off my old self. And I think of it just like that. That guy wants me dead. That guy that runs my ego and runs my self-will and runs my resentments and runs my judgment. And I'm telling you, he's like the mad monk. You can't kill him. You might think he's dead because he goes away for sometimes long periods of time. And you think how spiritually evolved you are. And then he comes back. He just shows up and acts like a jerk in the supermarket or at work or with your wife. Or, we were talking about this the other day, like driving down the road and you see somebody with a flat tire and you go, oh, God, why me, God? Good people that don't have to go to meetings every week and have a sponsor and work steps, you know what they do? They just pull over. They just pull over. Do you need any help? We have to go a half a mile past doing a 10th step and thinking about our sponsor and what we've learned and what would God have me do. And, thank God it's only a flat tire and they're not drowning, It's like, Oh, shit, they're drowning. Well, 10-step, what's my part in it? And, we got to work at this stuff. It doesn't come naturally to us. Page 63 contains the third step prayer. Now, there's something I want to just spend a second talking about this. If you don't know the third step prayer by heart, that doesn't mean you're not a good member of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you pray to God on a continuous basis in an honest and open manner, trying to seek His will for you, you're a great member of AA and you're on the right track. That's what I was taught. I like that the book is so gentle about this stuff. Some of the stuff that it's not gentle about, the absolute must and so forth, they're that way because there's no other way to present it. They want you to understand the penalty involved for not doing these things, that you could die. It's very serious stuff we deal with. But when they talk about prayer, they want us to really understand that you don't need to consider anybody else's idea, and you don't need to consider their prayers. You don't have to do it their way. But be open-minded. Look at it as an opportunity for an exchange of ideas about the experiences other men have had with their God of their understanding. And the third step prayer is just an idea. And in the prayer, it contains the ideas that Bill wanted you to understand. So you can take these ideas, these concepts contained in the prayer, and you can do anything you want with them. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. I'm surrendering there. I'm giving myself over to God. I'm offering. I don't even know if God's going to take me, but I'm making the offer. Do what you want with me. Build with me. You couldn't do worse than me, God. Look what I've done to myself. Please, give me a shot here. Relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties. I love that when I read it for the first time. That victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. With Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life, may I do Thy will always. And it goes on to say, we thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to Him. That is a warning. That's a warning. The book is full of promises, but it's also full of warnings. It wants us to be clear about things.